That hantavirus outbreak on a cruise ship hitting a little closer to home.
Health officials saying this afternoon they are monitoring Kansans who were close to a person who tested positive. So here's what we know. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment confirming this afternoon it is monitoring 3 people with a high-risk exposure to a person confirmed with hantavirus. The agency saying that the 3 in Kansas were not on the cruise ship at the center of the outbreak. That exposure happened after they made contact with a person who later tested positive for the virus. They are currently not experiencing symptoms. No additional details are being shared about the 3 in order to protect privacy. KDHE is stressing that at this time there are no suspected or confirmed cases in Kansas, adding that the risk to the public from the hantavirus remains extremely low. We'll continue to monitor this and bring you any updates as soon as we get them. So far, the World Health Organization has confirmed 9 cases of the strain of the virus linked to that Dutch cruise ship. There are also 2 probable cases.
18 Americans are now being monitored at facilities in Georgia and Nebraska. This video shows British Army medics parachuting onto a remote island in the Atlantic to treat a man who possibly contracted the virus on that ship.
At the moment, there is no sign that we are seeing the start of a larger outbreak.
One American who tested positive but is not experiencing symptoms is currently being held in a biocontainment unit at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Health officials say symptoms of the virus can appear up to 42 days after exposure, but again, they stress this is not the start of another pandemic.